Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's installment of Rebecca. I believe we're at week 6. I can't even believe how fast this is going. So we are just a smidgen behind, as always. I'm always behind. But I get so interested in the outside materials that I just have to share 'em. I have a biography of Daphne du Maurier. It's pretty good, actually. It's called Manderley Forever by Tatiana de Rosnay. Um, it just gives us a little insight into du Maurier, but she says a few things right off the bat on the first page, and that I think reveal something about the novel and about du Maurier. The author says that she was under the spell of the du Maurier magic, in quotation marks, her singular style, that famous psychological suspense. I'm sure by now that you are seeing the psychological suspense because we watch what is going on in the I speaker's mind as she makes observations and listens to what other people are saying. This author also says that, and we've seen this, that she was scorned by critics because she sold millions of books. Her macabre and fascinating world produced a complex, surprisingly dark oeuvre, far removed from the romantic novelist she was unfairly labeled as. I think that's really true. And I'm sure I mentioned this, that in graduate school, this was a B novel and when I was in graduate school. But I'm sure you are enjoying this as much as I am, and it's just so well written and conveyed. No wonder she sold millions of copies. Um, Du Maurier also said at one point, and I forgot to check the source of this, but she said that people and things pass away, but not places. Um, and she has this attachment to Menabilly, which is where she lived, which became Manderley. And that's what it looked like. Isn't that interesting? So, I'm going to start right in where we left off, and I'm hoping that I'm right in thinking that we left off at chapter 8, and then I'm going to intersperse some information about the vast numbers of symbols and references that she includes in the novel. So I'm on chapter 8, which begins on page 80. Right off the bat, we see an image that appears repeatedly, and that is when Maxime peels his fruit. How many times did we see that when they were in Monte Carlo, and then now he does the same thing. I think what du Maurier is trying to convey to us is the orderliness of Manderley. There is an order that remains in place, thankfully, or to not thankfully, but thanks to Mrs. Danvers. And every time she appears, I swear I can hear a gong. Dum. She's so um so she says, the I speaker says, how impressed I was. I remember well, impressed and a little overawed by the magnificence of the breakfast offered to us. And she gives us many, many, many details about the piles of food. And again, giving us a picture of the kind of lifestyle that Maxime, and others live at Manderley. She says she wonders at the top of 81, were there menials, I wondered, whom I should never know, never see, waiting behind the kitchen doors for the gift of our breakfast. Or was it all thrown away, shoveled into dustpans? I would never know, of course. I would never dare ask. And I highlight this because it emphasizes the place that the I speaker lives internally between classes. She is clearly not of the class of Maxime, who never questions the amount of food, and yet she does because she sees the world from a different class. Um, she says on the middle of page 81, then he picked up his letters and went out of the room. And I remember thinking this was not how I imagined my first morning. I had seen us walking together, arms linked, to the sea, coming back rather late, tired and happy, to a cold lunch alone, and sitting afterwards under that chestnut tree I could see from the library window. It's interesting. That point is interesting because it sets up the many, many stories that she creates. She speculates about what people are thinking. She speculates about what will happen. She speculates constantly, creating these little scenarios, and we'll see them over and over. Um, I have a note about that. So much of Rebecca consists of the narrator's imaginings of what might happen or what others might be saying or thinking. There's little scenarios. In terms of Rebecca, the problem is magnified. Rebecca, not the novel, Rebecca the person. Everything the narrator tells us about Rebecca is either what she imagines or what she hears from other characters, all of whom have their own motives and their own imaginations guiding their versions. Because remember, we see this entire period of time straight from the I speaker's point of view, including her vision of Rebecca, because she doesn't meet Rebecca. Rebecca's dead. This multi-layered narrative, and that's something that you should keep in your head. The multi-layered narrative technique presents readers with a puzzle that can't ever be quite solved. Oh, I got to stop here. I hate giving away the story if you haven't gotten to the end of it. So we're going to see that repeatedly, over and over and over, that the I speaker creates these what might be or what is. There's a difference. She says at the bottom of 81, I wondered if he suspected, as Mrs. Danvers had done, that poise, grace, and assurance were not qualities inbred in me, but were things to be acquired painfully, perhaps, and slowly, costing me many bitter moments. We see her self-deprecating view over and over and over. She puts herself down. She thinks herself stupid. She thinks herself awkward and ill at ease. She thinks that perhaps the staff is laughing at her. She says that there's a household routine that she doesn't know. Over on the top of page 83, just an indicator of this routine that she doesn't know. The fire in the library is not usually lit until the afternoon, madam, he says. That's Frith. Mrs. De Winter always used the morning room. This ghost of Mrs. De Winter the First. And we never see a ghost, by the way, just remember that. But she's lurking in everybody's imaginations. And then he calls the I speaker Mrs. De Winter. So there's just an odd comparison between Rebecca, Mrs. De Winter, and the I speaker. If we go to the next page, we are in the drawing room. She says at the top, it had all the formality of a room in a museum where alcoves were roped off, and a guardian in cloak and hat like the guides in the French chateau sat in a chair beside the door. I went through then and turned to the left, and so on to the little morning room I had not seen before. The little morning room, of course, is the room where we think that Rebecca um, spent a lot of time. She talks again on the next page. Oh no, I'm on 84. I was glad to see the dogs there sitting before the fire, and Jasper the younger came over to me at once, his tail wagging, and thrust his nose into my hand. Pay attention to this dog. I told you last week that that dogs, of course, are always the companions, but when 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 the eye speaker needs to distract herself or needs to to do something because she can't think of anything else to do, she bends down to pet the dog. We all do this. Daphne is over there. If I'm feeling an awkward moment, I can just lean over and pet the dogs. So in the middle of this page, um, this was their routine. They knew, even as Frith had known, that the library fire was not lit until the afternoon. They came to the morning room, the dogs, from long custom. We're going to see the dog, Jasper, later behaving as custom. Somehow I guessed before going to the room that the room looked out upon the rhododendrons. Yes, there they were, blood red and luscious, as I had seen them the evening before. Well, these rhododendrons, let's see. It's a sea green tab. The rhododendrons and the azaleas are going to appear repeatedly. And I found a little bit of information about them. Um, they are blood red, they are crimson, and the azaleas are white. And they represent Rebecca because Rebecca cultivated them. And this little bit that I have here, the blood red rhododendrons and the white azaleas are both cultivated by Rebecca. Both dominate Manderley. The rhododendrons are all over the property, and various things owned by Rebecca still hold the scent of azaleas. We're going to see I can't remember if we've seen it or if we're going to see this, that there's a hanky and a Macintosh that the eye speaker puts on, a hanky, and it smells like azaleas. So the scent of the azaleas permeates the place, but it also represents Rebecca because she smelled like azaleas. Is that creepy or what? The white azalea petals on the ground of the Happy Valley, make us think of Rebecca's dead body. She always smelled like azaleas in the form of these flowers and is still all over the property. When Maxime and the eye speaker go to the Happy Valley, this is almost an oxymoron because the Happy Valley is contrasted to the little alcove where apparently Rebecca drowned. So this makes the moment where Maxime rubs a dead azalea petal on Mrs. De Winter's skin decidedly creepy, and it makes us wonder how he really feels about the two Mrs. De Winters. The rhododendrons and azaleas might represent wild, uncontrollable nature, like the sea. They contrast the careful, quiet roses in the rose garden, which is what this Mrs. De Winter sees out of her east window. We'll get to the two wings in a minute. It suggests these rhododendrons. I think they're about that big, and they're wild, and they've got these. They're often described as having these crimson heads, whereas out of our eye speaker's window, she sees the rose garden, which are highly cultivated. And they're beautiful in their own right. But there was a point at which Maxime says that he didn't allow any of the flowers to be cut because once you brought them in the house, they died. The only flowers that he allowed to come in were the roses. And the roses are in this garden. And there was a point early on in the novel where Maxime says that the rose garden reminded him of his mother, who cultivated the roses, whereas Rebecca cultivated these wild rhododendrons that they're crimson and red and blood red and all that, and the azaleas. Down at the bottom of page 84, she's talking about this garden room. This was a woman's room, graceful, fragile, the room of someone who had chosen every particle of furniture with great care. All I could think of was that if I were in this eye speaker's shoes, I'd redecorate. Quick. There's something so creepy about that room. They are all in harmony with another, with her own personality at the top of page 85. And a few lines later, they are vividly alive, having something the same glow and brilliance that the rhododendrons had, massed there beneath the window. And I noticed then that the rhododendrons, not content with forming their theater on the little lawn outside the window, had been permitted to the room itself. So they're in the room. This poor girl cannot get away from Rebecca. Next paragraph, the room was filled with them. Even the walls took color from them, becoming rich and glowing in the morning sun. So the rhododendrons are pervasive. I'd tell the girl, cut them, get some tulips. Down at the bottom of this page. She's looking at Rebecca's desk, and Maxine told her to write some letters or something. And down at the bottom, she sees all these pigeonholes and the same scrawling pointed hand that I knew already. And it shocked me, even startled me to recognize it again, for I had not seen it since I had destroyed the page from the book of poems. And I had not thought to see it again. Rebecca is not gone. She's all over this place. Now, the interesting thing about what Du Maurier has done here is that she's made Rebecca's presence known without there actually being a ghost. There's no ghost. And it's something like in Jane Eyre, where the laughter and the weird visions of a woman running around at night, it was all explained. And that's the same thing with Rebecca's presence. It's all explainable. She says at the end of the first paragraph, there was notepaper also in the drawer, thick white sheets for rough writing, and the notepaper of the house with the crest and the address and visiting cards, ivory white in little boxes. She says in the next paragraph, I took one out and looked at it, unwrapped it from its thin tissue of paper. Mrs. M. De Winter, it said, in the corner manderly. I put it back in the box again and shut the drawer, feeling guilty suddenly and deceitful, as though I were staying in someone else's house. Oh, gosh, I think that's just her whole perspective, is that she's in somebody else's house. And my hostess had said to me, yes, of course, write letters at my desk, and I had unforgivably, in a stealthy manner, peeped at her correspondence. At any moment she might come back into the room, and she would see me there, sitting before her open drawer, which I had no right to touch. This psychological oppression of our eye speaker by the routine of the house, by the insistence that the servants have of maintaining that routine. It's almost as if our eye speaker has no place. Down at the bottom of the page, we have a bit of a painful moment. The phone rings, and it's Mrs. Danvers, madam, said the voice. I'm speaking to you on the house telephone. My faux pas was so palpably obvious, so idiotic and unpardonable, that to ignore it would show me to be an even greater fool, if possible, than I already was. Isn't that sad? It's just painful. Her lack of position in this household. She just doesn't belong. She has a awkward conversation with Mrs. Danvers. We'll get back to Mrs. Danvers. She's a hard nut to crack. So our I speaker is sitting at this little desk um, that is not hers, and she's wasting time. She says on the next page, she who sat here before me had not wasted her time as I was doing. There's an interesting piece later on, and we'll get to this, I'm sure, today, that Maxime says that writing letters is a waste of time. Maxime said that. And so here she is. She's not writing letters the way Rebecca did, but that's a bit of insight on what maybe Maxine thinks. Down at the bottom of page 88, she said that the only person that she can even think to write, because remember, our I speaker is an orphan. And she thinks, well, the only person she can write to is Mrs. Van Hopper. And there was something foolish, rather ironical, in the realization that here I was sitting at my own desk in my own home with nothing better to do than write a letter to Mrs. Van Hopper, a woman I disliked. And so there is the contrast. This is her house. She's the Mrs. De Winter. And yet Rebecca is this pervasive presence. At the end of this chapter, I noticed for the first time how cramped and unformed was my own handwriting, without individuality, without style, uneducated even, the writing of an indifferent pupil taught in a second-rate school. That's her perspective of herself. If we go into the next chapter, right at the beginning, we see the I speaker, and I'm just going to call her that, the I speaker, because she has no name. And she creates another story for herself. I wondered, first paragraph, I wondered if it would be possible to hide, to get out of the window into the garden, so that Frith, bringing them to the morning room, would say, Madam must have gone out, and it would seem quite natural that they would take as a matter of course. The dogs looked up inquiringly as I ran to the window, and Jasper followed me, wagging his tail. So she's going to sneak out the window as the guests come, at Beatrice, whom later she learns to really like. So Beatrice and her husband have come to call. Another uncomfortable thing for our poor I speaker. Can you, we have phones. Can you see Daphne over there? There's Daphne's tail. There she is. Really, she was named for Daphne du Maurier. So she's going to sneak out the window because it's so awkward and painful to meet these people. Except for Jasper has given her away. He sits there looking at the window, wagging his tail. I went quickly into the big drawing room and made for a door near me on the left. It led into a long stone passage, and I ran along, fully aware of my stupidity, despising myself for this sudden attack of nerves. And I think we can all relate to that. I sure could. When you have guests that you don't know, or you walk into a party, well, we can't walk into parties anymore because of COVID, but you walk in and you don't know a single soul. It is embarrassing. So she's gone up to upstairs to try and escape, and she finds another staircase. It was very quiet and dark. At the end of this paragraph, at the end on page 91, she says, and I thought as I stood there wondering which way to turn, that the silence was unusual, holding something of the same oppression as an empty house does when the owners have gone away. We wonder where she's going. What is she going to do? She opens the door in total darkness. The room smelt close and stale. I like the learnt and smelt. It's a British spelling. The room smelt close and stale. A dead moth who had been imprisoned behind them for many months would fall to the carpet. She's envisioning this, but you can see that. You can see a dead moth. Yeah, the detail, Du Maurier's detail is so precise. You can just see a dead moth. And then she looks below, out the window. I looked out and I saw below me the smooth grass lawns stretching to the sea. The sea itself, bright green with white-topped crests, whipped by a westerly wind and scudding from the shore. The sea, again, appears over and over and over. And we know, from what little we know of Rebecca, is that she drowned in the sea. There's more sea at the bottom of page 91. She's looking out, looking at the sea, which means that she is in the west wing. It was closer than I had thought, much closer. It ran surely beneath the little knot of trees below the lawns, barely 5 minutes away, and if I listened now, my ear to the window, I could hear the surf breaking on the shores of some little bay I could not see. I knew then I had made the circuit of the house and was standing in the corridor of the west wing. She sneaked into the west wing. Uh-oh. There was a mist. She was so close to the sea that there's a mist on the windows, as though someone had breathed upon it, and it is the sea. So let's take a look at this about the sea. No, about the east versus west. Look at all my tabs. So at Manderley, much is made of the difference between the west wing, where Maxime and Rebecca lived, and the east wing, where Maxime and the current I speaker, Mrs. De Winter, live. The west wing overlooks the ocean and the woods. It is framed by the blood-red rhododendrons, which Rebecca herself cultivated, and which are also used to decorate the morning room, which was Rebecca's personal domain. What's really weird, and we'll get to this, I think it's chapter 14. Such a bizarre place. But Mrs. Danvers tries to preserve the room as it was when Rebecca was alive. And people sometimes do that. They preserve a room having no idea how to manage that. But if we compare the West Wing and the East Wing, the East Wing has just had an expensive redecorating job ordered by Maxime, and overlooks a rose garden. Yet with some hints from Mrs. Danvers, Mrs. De Winter, the I speaker, becomes convinced that her installment in what she sees as the inferior of the house is proof of her status as the inferior wife. Yeah, it's too bad. The flowers are intimately associated with Rebecca, but the rose garden is associated, oh, this is where I got this from, with Maxime's mother. He says, I think it's in chapter 7, I love the rose garden. One of the first things I remember is walking after my mother on very small, unsteady legs while she picked off the dead heads of the roses. So if any of you have flowers in the summer, which we probably all do, one of the things you have to do is deadhead everything, like the roses and daisies. You take the deadheads off. Perhaps Maxine wants to live an innocent life, free from the wild, unpredictable life with Rebecca, which the West Wing represents. He wants the new Mrs. De Winter, perhaps, to help erase the old Mrs. De Winter, the dead one. There's a nice image at the bottom of page 92. So she says, perhaps you would like me to show you all over the West Wing. That's Mrs. Danvers. She says, no, rather not. I said, no, I must go downstairs. I began to walk down the stairs, and she came with me by my side as though she were a warden and I in custody. Of course, I marked that because, as you all know, I work in a jail, and um, they're called COs now, court officers, always escort inmates. So I could really visualize that. So Mrs. De Winter says to the eye speaker, anytime when you have nothing to do, which is kind of pointed because poor Mrs. De Winter doesn't have anything to do. She says, I will show you the rooms in the West Wing. She persisted, making me vaguely uncomfortable. Um, at, so at the bottom of page 93, another really fabulous image. And I felt suddenly that she knew, that she must have watched me, that she had seen me wandering perhaps in the West Wing from the first, her eye to a crack in the door. So she's imagining that, but we can absolutely see that. You can see people. Isn't that weird? Next page. She says, yes, Mrs. Danvers, I said, and this is at the top of 94. I went down the big stairway into the hall, knowing she was standing there above me, her eyes watching me. She's so creepy. Mrs. Danvers still standing there at the head of the stairs like a black sentinel. She says she was full of a sick uncertainty and a sea of faces. That's an interesting image because we have the real sea out there, and then we have this really apparently unfriendly sea of faces. Over at the sea of faces, of course, is the staff, and poor eye speaker has absolutely no idea what to do with the staff. So here comes Beatrice, and Beatrice is going to be an interesting character because I wonder if I have a note about Beatrice. No, I don't. But Beatrice becomes someone who tries to help our eye speaker. She's pretty straightforward, and in fact, the descriptions we get of Beatrice is that she is very straightforward and perhaps a little masculine, but maybe it's just that she's really self-assured. She was looking me up and down as I had expected, but in a direct, straightforward fashion, not maliciously like Mrs. Danvers, not with unfriendliness. There's a contrast between Beatrice and Mrs. Danvers. In the middle of page 95, I could tell by the tightening of Maxime's muscles under my arm that he was trying to keep his temper. For some reason, this talk about his health was not welcome to him, angered him even, and I thought it tactless of Beatrice to harp upon it in any way, making it so big a point of it. So the author is just dropping us hints here about Maxine's personality, and it also harkens back to just before the eye speaker and Maxine meet. And Maxine seemed to have been in pretty poor health. We don't know why, but it seems as though this Mrs. De Winter kind of brings him out of himself. Let's see. An interesting point about Italy. Only one bad day, wasn't it, Maxime? The conversation drawing away happily from his health. And so to Italy, safest of subjects and the blessed topic of fine weather. Italy is an important element because we don't actually see them in Italy. I'm using my phone to keep the book open. They honeymoon in Italy, but it is a place where they seemed to have done well together, the Mrs. and Mr. De Winter. Maxine and Mrs. De Winter spent their honeymoon in Italy. It's constantly recalled as a place where they are happy and healthy. Pay attention to this. As you are going along, if you see a reference to Italy, note that it is a positive memory. The time The time that passes between Italy and Manderley, the more time, the more time that passes between Italy and Manderley, the thinner, paler, and more desperate they become. Isn't that interesting? In a number of chapters, we're going to see that Beatrice tells her to put on some weight. Why are you so thin? She says. Um, when Maxime shows his loving and carefree side, Mrs. De Winter, the eye speaker, thinks this is better. This is like it was in Italy. And on the other side of the coin, when things are going wrong, Maxime will say, we ought to have stayed in Italy. Oh God, what a fool I was to come back. That was a number of chapters ago. So pay attention. That it's an interesting observation. If we go back to the book on page 95, oh no, already, nope, 96. So, the atmosphere, middle of page 96, the atmosphere was becoming rather strained again. I could tell by the narrow line of Maxime's mouth, and I wondered if brothers and sisters always sparred like this, making it uncomfortable for those who listened. I wished that Frith would come in and announce lunch, or we would be summoned by a booming gong, or would we be summoned by booming gong? I think that must be the image that I have in my head about Mrs. Danvers' presence. It always seems like boom every time she comes in. Poor thing. She says, I did not know what happened at Manderley. She doesn't know the routine. Down at the bottom, pay attention to how many times people ask our poor speaker, do you hunt? Do you ride? And she always has to say, no, I don't. Emphasizing the difference in class. All right, so apparently upper class people hunt and ride horseback, and this poor eye speaker does not. So they're talking about at the top of page 90. This is Beatrice and the eye speaker. They're talking about swimming, and in the sea. You could, I would think that would be very dangerous, especially knowing, as we think, Rebecca has drowned in the sea. And the sea, as I told you before, is neither malevolent nor benevolent. It just is. Beatrice says the water is far too cold and the beach is shingle. And I think by shingle, it's a rocky, coarse sand. She says, I don't mind that. I love bathing, as long as the currents are not too strong. Interesting. Is the bathing safe in the bay? Nobody answered. And you wonder why. Is that some foreshadowing? Just keep that in your head. Okay, let's go to the next page on 98. At the bottom, poor thing. At the bottom of 98. Do you play golf at all, Mrs. De Winter? Said Mr. Crowley. No, she doesn't do any of these leisurely sports. Again, emphasizing lower class status. Top of page 99. There was something solid and safe and dull about golf. It could not bring us into any difficulties. She's talking about playing golf, and Giles, who is Beatrice's husband, and he says something like, about Mrs. Danvers on the previous page. Amazing woman, that Mrs. Danvers, said Giles, turning to me. Don't you think so? What we know is that poor eye speaker is afraid of Mrs. Danvers. So, here we see the poor eye speaker upsetting another glass. I got up at once, shaking the table clumsily as I moved my chair and upsetting Giles's glass of port. She's always turning over things. But you can imagine, I'm tucked in here pretty tightly, and if I were to stand up rapidly, I would knock my table. And so the image to me is just really precise. So, no, we don't need to notice that. Over there's some mystery. Page 100. Thank you, Beatrice, I said. Thank you very much. I wondered why she said she hoped we would be happy instead of saying she knew we would be so. She's picking up on some cues here. She was kind. She was sincere. I liked her very much. But there was a tiny doubt in her voice that made me afraid. Therein lies the mysteries. So our eye speaker's detecting something, but boy, she can't figure it out. Middle of page 100. Poor Maxime, she said. He went through a ghastly time, and let's hope you have made him forget about it. Of course, he adores Manderley. Next paragraph. Part of me wanted her to continue her train of thought, to tell me more of the past, naturally and easily like this, and something else way back in my mind did not want to know, did not want to hear. Emphasizing the mystery here. And the mystery is probably some darkness. Down at the bottom of page 100, an insight into Maxime. Maxime loses his temper once or twice a year, and when he does, my God, he does lose it. I don't suppose he ever will tell you. I should think you are a placid little thing. So, we're not sure. Are we going to see this bad temper? And then there's a reference on page 101 by Beatrice. She said, "No, I think that's worse. It's too severe. It doesn't suit you. No, all you need is a wave, just to pinch it up. I never have cared for that Joan of Arc business or whatever they call it." It took me a while to figure that one out. This is the late 30s, and women had bobbed their hair. And that's the Joan of Arc look, because if you remember the story of Joan of Arc, she cut her hair so that she could join the military and look like a man. So that bob haircut was popular after 1909. What does Maxime say? Does he think it suits you? Well, Beatrice doesn't think it does. Let's see if we hop on over to page 102. So Beatrice says, "Oh, I don't suppose she'd mind that." This is what I wanted you to see. Beatrice again began whistling again, and she rubbed Jasper's head with her foot. "I shouldn't have more to do with her than you can help, Mrs. Danvers. No, she runs the house very efficiently. There's no need for me to interfere." I felt sorry for her because it's supposed to be her house, and she's not even allowed to interfere with the housekeeper. I should have imagined that interference was the one thing Mrs. Danvers did not want. "I dare say she will get over it in time," said Beatrice, "but it may make things rather unpleasant for you at first. Of course, she's insanely jealous. I was afraid she would be." "Jealous of what?" "Why," I said, looking at, "why should she be jealous? Maxime does not seem to be particularly fond of her. My dear child, it's not Maxime she's thinking of. I think she respects him and all that, but nothing more very much. No, you see, she says she resents your being here at all. That's the trouble." Mrs. Danvers resents the eye speaker. Well, that's a curious insight. That's much of Beatrice's role. We've already seen that she's straightforward. She speaks the truth in a clear and undecorated way, and she's telling the eye speaker her role is to give us her point of view. So let's see. Top of page 103, here's an example of the role that Jasper plays. We both went on petting and stroking Jasper, who, unaccustomed to such attention, rolled over on his back in ecstasy. So Jasper, as for dogs, Jasper is an easy distraction when the moment gets awkward. We all looked at Jasper in the next paragraph. So there's a couple of references to Grandma. What on earth does Maxime see in her, but kind at the same time, not unfriendly? They were talking about their grandmother. We must go over and see the old lady, Maxine was saying. And she's getting gaga, said Beatrice. Drops food all down her chin, poor darling. Beatrice and Maxine call her the old lady. It seems a little disrespectful, I'm just going to say. And to say the poor thing is gaga. But I don't know, it doesn't seem like the two are all that warm about the grandmother. At the bottom of page 103, that's what I do to Jasper, I thought. I'm being like Jasper now, leaning against him. He pats me now and again when he remembers, and I'm pleased. Maxime, I get closer to him for a moment. He likes me in the way I like Jasper. And over we see that Maxine kisses the top of her head. It's a little condescending. It kind of makes her look childish. Um, and she makes this comparison between her and Jasper. Um, in the middle of page 104, in a little while it would be different. There would come tomorrow and the next day and another year, and we would be changed perhaps, never sitting quite like this again. Some of us would go away or suffer or die, futures stretched away in front of us, unknown, unseen, not perhaps what we wanted, not what we had planned. This moment was safe, though. This could not be touched. Here we sat together, Maxime and I, hand in hand, and the past and the future mattered not at all. This was secure, this funny fragment of time. He would never remember, never think about it again. Remember when she was still in Monte Carlo and sitting with Maxime at one or another meal that they had together, and she says she wishes she could keep the moment in a jar permanently. She talks about time and memory and things like that quite a bit. Um, At the end of this paragraph, however, they did not want to hold it close, imprisoned and secure as I did. They were not afraid. So she's talking about Maxime and Giles and Beatrice. They don't want to hold these memories secure the way the eye speaker does. She does because she's afraid. Page 103, right in the middle. Um, let's see. She had been here, bred here. She knew it all. She belonged here more than I should ever do. She's super awkward. She must have many memories locked inside her heart. I wondered if she ever thought about the days that were gone, ever remembered the lanky pig-tailed child that she had been once, so different from the woman she had become. 45 now, vigorous and settled in her ways, another person. And it's the way she treats memory, and she wonders about it, and she speculates that Beatrice had pigtails. I don't know if you can see this, but this is super annoying. I get little weather updates. If we go on to the next page, there's some hints at something in the middle of the page 106. Of course not. Very sensible of both of you both. After all, it wasn't as though she stopped in the middle of her sentence and dropped her bag. Damn, I have broken the catch. No, all is well. What was I saying? I can't remember. Oh, yes. Wedding presents. We must think of something. You probably don't care for jewelry. There's a suggestion here from Beatrice, but we don't know what it is. Neither does the eye speaker. And then, uh, poor eye speaker. Beatrice says, it's a pity you don't ride or shoot. You must miss such a lot. You don't sail by any chance, do you? All of these leisure activities that the upper class participate in, our eye speaker doesn't. And she says, no, I don't. And Beatrice says, thank God for that. And I wonder why. So A quick note on page 107 at the end of one of the 4th paragraph. "Come on, Bee," shouted Giles. "I felt a spot of rain, so we've put on the cover. Maxine says the glass is falling." So the thermometer or the barometer, that's what that is falling. And then down at the bottom at the end of this chapter, you see, she said, this is Beatrice, snapping the top and walking down the stairs, "You're so very different from Rebecca." And we came out onto the steps and found the sun had gone behind a bank of clouds. A little thin rain was falling, and Robert was hurrying across the lawn to bring in the chairs. It's almost as if the change in weather, well, it's not almost as if, it does. The change in weather reflects almost a cloud that has come over because Beatrice has said, "You're so very different from Rebecca." And what our eye speaker perceives is that it's a negative comparison, even from Beatrice, who seems to be quite straightforward and without much judgment. We go into the next chapter. So Maxime and Beatrice apparently don't always see eye to eye, but we still like her. And the top of page 109, or in the middle of page 109, they're walking, Maxime and I speaker. "We came to a clearing in the woods, and there were two paths going in opposite directions. Jasper took the right-hand path without hesitation. It's part of his custom. And we wonder, why does he always go that way?" This very much, I'm sure, reminds you of the Robert Frost poem, "Path Not Taken," "The Road Not Taken." So Maxime says, "I suppose he's used to it. It leads to a small cove where we used to keep a boat. Come on, Jasper, old man." Jasper always goes there. What are they hinting at? Top of page 110. My thoughts wandered back to Beatrice, wondering why her presence should have disturbed him, what she had done, and I thought too of all she had said about his temper. Sorry, almost sneezed, and I was afraid to turn off the camera because I shut it off instead of pause it. But crisis averted. What she had done, and I thought too of all she had said about his temper, how he lost it, and she told me about once or twice a year. Okay, so that's the second reference to his ill temper in 5 pages. So we'll have to save that bit of detail. Next paragraph. "There were no dark trees here, no tangled undergrowth, but on either side of the narrow path stood azaleas and rhododendron. Not blood-colored like the giants in the drive, but salmon, white and gold, things of beauty and grace, drooping their lovely, delicate heads in the soft summer rain. These are different flowers. They've moved away from the house, from the rhododendrons that Rebecca cultivated. These are wilder, softer. And honestly, what I know about rhododendrons is ones that are this color." Next, towards the bottom of this page. "We stood quite still, not speaking, looking down upon the clear white faces of the flowers closest to us, and Maxine stooped and picked up a fallen petal and gave it to me. It was crushed and bruised, turning brown at the curled edge." Is that a symbol of death? And in a way, yes. Remember that every time the eye speaker speaks of Mrs. Danvers, she speaks about her white face, the white skull's face. This is a clever detail reminding us about death. These petals are dead, curled at the edges. Then the birds began. First a black bird, his note clear and cool above the running stream. And after a moment he had an answer from his fellow hidden in the woods behind us, and soon the still air about us was made turbulent by song, pursuing us as we wandered into the valley, and the fragrance of the white petals followed us too. She hasn't she doesn't know yet that the fragrance of the azaleas is reminiscent of Rebecca. It was disturbing, like an enchanted place. I had not thought it could be as beautiful as this. Another reference to the azaleas in the middle of the next paragraph. But we get to this place called the Happy Valley. The spell of the Happy Valley was upon me. This at last was the core of Manderley, the Manderley I would know and learn to love. The first drive was forgotten, the black, herded woods, the glaring rhododendrons, luscious and overproud. In the vast house, too, the silence of the echoing howl, the uneasy stillness in the west wing, wrapped in dust sheets. There I was an interloper. But here it was different in the Happy Valley. The Happy Valley knew no trespassers. Down at the bottom of page 111, the enchantment was no more. The spell was broken. We were mortal again. Two people playing on the beach. Oh, this I wanted just to show you. We threw more stones, went to the water's edge, flung ducks and drakes, and fished for driftwood. It's a really very beautiful picture. And when you fling ducks and drakes, you are skipping stones on the surface. That's what that was. So now Jasper disappears. Jasper has taken the other path because he's accustomed to it. And she's thinking he's not going to be safe. It's, of course, the first thing I was thinking, somebody go get that dog. They go to another cove, and there she sees that there was a buoy anchored there, but no boat. A couple paragraphs later, the dog looked up, wagging his tail, but he did not obey me. He went on baiting the solitary figure on the beach. And we come across this character, Ben. So this was written, of course, in 1938. So the language she chose to describe this character is perhaps not politically correct in the 21st century. I'm just going to say. And we know that, but we can't judge it from our 21st century point of view. She says that let's see. I saw then that he had the small slit eyes of an idiot. It kind of makes everybody flinch a little bit. So he has Down syndrome. That's what we are essentially made to understand. And most of you know that I wrote a book a number of years ago in which I identified handicapped characters in fiction. I didn't include this character, but many of you know that I have a sister who is disabled, not Down syndrome, but she is disabled, and so I was sensitive to that. And it always seemed as if these characters in fiction were truth speakers. And that is the role that we're going to see in Ben. And he says on the next, so she tells him that she has come down here to get Jasper, and but she needs a bit of rope, so she goes into this boathouse, and hoping that she's going to find some string or something. She could see that no one lived here, no one came here. At the bottom of page 114, it was damp in the cottage, damp and chill, dark and oppressive. I did not like it. I had no wish to stay here. I hated the hollow sound of the rain pattering on the roof. Next paragraph. There was another door at the end of the room, and I went to it and opened it, a little fearful, a little afraid, for I had that odd, uneasy feeling that I might come upon something unawares, that I had no wish to see, something that might harm me, that might be horrible. Remember from Telltale Heart, the eye speaker creaks open the door. That's what made me think of that. Um, there's there's something about the genre that creaks open the creepy door. Um, let's see. It's kind of like in Jane Eyre too. Creepy doors and things. I came out of the cottage hurriedly, not looking behind me, trying not to see the torn sofa and mildewed china, the spun cobwebs on the model ships, and through the creaking gate and on the white beach. So there is something deserted, somber, dark about that cottage, and we don't know what it is yet. So she's tugging on Jasper, and the man staring at me with his narrow idiot's eyes. I see ye go in yonder, he said. Yes, I said, it's all right. Mr. De Winter won't mind. She don't go in there now. That's his role. He'll tell what he sees. She gone in the sea, ain't she? He said. She won't come back no more. No, I said, she'll not come back. I never said nothing, did I? What? Oh, interesting. Just keep that in your brain because it appears in a few pages. Jasper kept barking at the man. Who was he? Maxime said, only Ben. And she admits that she had gone into the boathouse. Boathouse. Um, and I don't know if you noticed this, but right in the middle of page 116, there's a spelling error. Yes, I pushed it open and found the string in the other room where the sails were, and a small boat. I think it's supposed to be where. Did Ben tell you the door was open? No, he did not seem to understand anything I asked him. And down at the bottom of this page, Maxine did not reply. He walked at a tremendous pace, and the climb up from the beach was steep. It was very different from the Happy Valley. The trees were dark here and close together. There were no azaleas brushing the path. The rain dripped heavily from the thick branches. It splashed on my collar and trickled down my neck, and I shivered. It was unpleasant, like a cold finger. No wonder people lapped up this book because the detail and the creation of mystery is so it's subtle. It isn't we don't see a ghost, and there aren't rattling chains like there is in the Christmas Carol. So she said that she had gone to get Jasper because she was afraid of the tide. Um, And then down at the bottom of page 117, oh, Maxine, how should I know? I'm not a thought reader. I know you did not want to. That's all. That's all. I could see it in your face. See what in my face? I've told you. I could see you did not want to go. Oh, do let's have an end of it. I'm sick to death of the subject. All women say that when they've lost an argument. All right. I did not want to go to the other beach. Will that please you? Something weird about that other beach. I never go near the bloody place or that goddamn cottage. And if you had any memories, you would not go there either, or talk about it, or even think about it. There, you can digest that if you like, and I hope it satisfies you. Again, the concept of memory. He has memories there, memories that we think are probably pretty dark. His face was white, and his eyes strained and wretched with that dark, lost look they had had when I first met him. He is that Byronic hero, like what we saw. Well, if you've read Jane Eyre lately, Mr. Rochester, the brooding look, the darkness. Remember when Maxine was sitting at the breakfast table? He was just staring, dark and brooding. And here, page 118, we ought to have stayed in Italy. We ought never to have come back to Manderley. Oh, God, what a fool I was to come back. Why? What is going on here? Don't know. At last we came to the top of the path. I'm in the middle, page 118, and I saw its fellow branching left to the Happy Valley. So there's two paths. One goes to the Happy Valley, and the other goes the other direction. And this is the one that Jasper takes. This is the one that Jasper takes and finds himself in that other cove where Ben is, where the cottage is. Over on page 119, right in the middle of the page. Yes, I said, I've made you unhappy. It's the same as making you angry. You're all wounded and hurt and torn inside. I can't bear to see you like this. I love you so much. The Byronic hero. Brooding, sad, wounded, torn. And she says, I love you so much. There's not a lot of that love going the other direction towards her. Do you? He said. Do you? He held me very tight, and his eyes questioned me, dark and uncertain, the eyes of a child in pain, a child in fear. Let's see, over on the top of page 120. It was over then. The episode was finished. We must not speak of it again. He smiled at me over his cup of tea, so his broodingness has gone away. And then reached for the newspaper on the arm of his chair. The smile was my reward, like a pat on the head of Jasper. It's really sad. Good dog, then. Lie down. Don't worry about me any more. I was Jasper again. I was back where I had been before. A few lines later, I felt very weak now, very tired in a dull, spent way. And she says that there is a hanky. This is the hanky part. Um, she takes it out of the pocket and she stares at it, frowning, for it was not mine. I remembered then that Frith had picked it up from the stone floor of the hall. It must have fallen out of the pocket of the mackintosh. And there's the tall, sloping R. Oh, she's just haunted by that woman. And it's a scrap of a thing. It must have been rolled in a ball. There's a dull scent that clung about it still at the bottom of page 120. A scent I recognized, a scent I knew. I shut my eyes and tried to remember. It was something elusive, something faint and fragrant that I could not name. I had breathed it before, touched it surely that very afternoon. And then I knew that the vanished scent upon the handkerchief was the same as the crushed white petals of the azaleas in the Happy Valley. Dang, isn't that creepy? Next paragraph. We have at the beginning of chapter 11 some detail about the weather. It was wet and cold for quite a week. I could see the sea. It looked gray and uninviting. A few lines later, I could hear the murmur of the sea below me, low and sullen, a dull, persistent sound that never ceased. It's almost as if the sea is brooding. At the end of this paragraph, for sometimes I could not sleep, and getting softly out of bed in the quiet of the night, I would wander to the window and lean there, my arms upon the sill, and the air would be very peaceful and very still. The sea is brooding, and she is too. And again, we have a picture of a character looking out the window. She's looking for something, but we don't know what it is. She doesn't know what it is. I could not hear the restless sea, and because I could not hear it, my thoughts would be peaceful too. They would not carry me down that steep path through the woods to the gray cove and the deserted cottage. I did not want to think about the cottage. I remembered it too often in the day. The memory of it nagged at me whenever I saw the sea from the terrace. At the top of page 123, again, the pervasive mystery and attitude of mystery in this place. I was not happy about them. I wanted to forget the things that she's remembering, including Ben. I wanted to forget them, but at the same time, I wanted to know why they disturbed me, why they made me uneasy and unhappy. Somewhere at the back of my mind, there was a frightened, furtive seed of curiosity that grew slowly and stealthily for all my denial of it, and I knew all the doubt and the anxiety of the child who has been told these things are not discussed, they are forbidden. Next two paragraphs. He walked alone on the other side, and I must not come to him. And I became nervous. And so him is Maxine, of course. And I became nervous and fearful that some heedless word, some turn in a careless conversation, should bring that expression back to his eyes. I began to dread any mention of the sea, for the sea might lead to boats, to accidents, to drowning. At the bottom of this page, I was wrong, of course, morbid and stupid. This was the hypersensitive behavior of a neurotic, not the normal happy self I knew myself to be. But I could not help it. I did not know what to do. My shyness and gaucherie became worse, too, making me stolid and dumb when people came to the house. Always that self-deprecation. Self-deprecation. And she talks about the agony of her shyness. If any of you out there are shy, it can be debilitating. She says it's a worse ordeal than I first anticipated because of this new fear of mine that they would talk about something that must not be discussed. Towards the bottom of page 124, I could picture them saying to one another, and remember, she speculates about what people are saying about her. I could picture them saying to one another as they drove away, "My dear, what a dull girl." She scarcely opened her mouth. And then the sentence I had first heard upon Beatrice's lips, haunting me ever since, a sentence I read in every eye, on every tongue. She's so different from Rebecca. And she makes the assumption that everybody's comparing her negatively. And she just put herself down as being dull and unable to speak, and she can't speak because she's so afraid that it's going to bring the darkness back to Maxime's face. If we look on page 125, a further pause, and then the lowered voice that is always used about the dead or in a place of worship. That's so true. You walk into a church and you do not talk at the regular volume. She was so tremendously popular now, such a personality. It's Rebecca. She's everywhere. Next page. She creates a little scenario in her head. This is third complete paragraph. I thought of the docketed pigeonholes in the desk in the morning room. I pictured the stack upon stack of invitation cards, the long list of names, the addresses, and I could see a woman sitting there at the desk, putting a check beside the names she wanted, and reaching for the invitation cards, dipping her pen in the ink, and writing upon them swift and sure in that long slanting hand. She's envisioning Rebecca seated at the desk making invitations to parties. And this poor thing is just so debilitated by her shyness and her feeling of being at the lower class that she can't do these things. She doesn't even know what to do. She says in the middle of this page, I heard myself saying boldly, brazenly, Rebecca must have been a wonderful person. I could not believe that I had said the name at last. I waited, wondering what would happen. I had said the name. Oh my gosh. I had said the word Rebecca aloud. It was a tremendous relief. It was as though I had taken a purge and rid myself of an intolerable pain. Rebecca, I had said it aloud. At the top of page 127, yes, she was a very lovely creature, so full of life. And she's talking to the bishop's wife. She seems to have been so good at everything, too, I said, my voice careless enough to show I did not mind, while I played with the fringe of my glove. Little nervous habit. It's not often you get someone who is clever and beautiful and fond of sport. There's at the end of the next paragraph, that cloud of dark hair against the very white skin, and her costume suited her so. Yes, she was very beautiful. Note the white skin. That comes back to the azaleas, the white skull's face of Mrs. Danver, and now she's got this white skin. Rebecca has the white skin. So there's frequent references to the eye speaker's interest in sketching. This woman calls it a nice little talent to have, said the bishop's wife. It's not everyone that can sketch. But everybody kind of poo-poos this. Although Beatrice, are we going to get to that? I think I'm trying to get a little bit further ahead. She says, do you play any games? Do you ride or shoot? No, I don't do anything like that. I'm fond of walking, I added as a wretched anticlimax. So again, she thinks she just isn't up to par. Next page, 128, at the end of it's about a third of the way down. She gave an order over her shoulder to a servant, someone who was never awkward, never without grace, who, when she danced, left a stab of perfume in the air like a white azalea. Interesting choice of word, a stab of perfume. That is not a positive connotation. She's talking about Rebecca, of course. At the bottom, she's speculating again about the comparison between the two Mrs. De Winters. Very different from the old days. They came because they wanted to compare me to Rebecca. I would not return those calls anymore, I decided. I should tell Maxine so. I did not mind if they thought me rude and ungracious. It would give them more to criticize, more to discuss. They could say I was ill-bred. She's just kind of rebelling. But uh, I'm not surprised they would say, after all, who was she? And then a laugh and a shrug of the shoulder. She's speculating this. They didn't really say this. Well, they may have, but we don't know. My dear, don't you know? He picked her up in Monte Carlo or something, or somewhere, and she hadn't a penny. She was a companion to some old woman. More laughter and lifting of eyebrows. She's speculating this. Nonsense, not really. How extraordinary men are. Maxime, of all people, who was so fastidious. How could he, after Rebecca? At the end of the paragraph, say we're getting these insights from other people, but she's speculating. She doesn't know if that really took place. As there's a little reference in page 129 about a third of the way up from the bottom. Yes, Frank, I said. I called him Frank because Maxime did, but he would always call me Mrs. De Winter. He was that sort of person. Even if we had been thrown on a desert island together and lived there in intimacy for the rest of our lives, I should have been Mrs. De Winter. No name. Still, even to Frank. Frank becomes her friend. And we see on the next page 130. He tells her, and as I said, Frank is her friend. There would be no need for you to do anything, he said. You would just be yourself and look decorative. But he's trying to encourage her to not compare herself. At the bottom of this page, we were silent then. We went on walking down the drive. Now that I had broken my reluctance to saying Rebecca's name, first with the bishop's wife, and now with Frank Crawley, the urge to continue was strong with me. She's going to try and find out some information. I thought it funny on the next page, the way he called her she. Once or twice, he said down at the bottom, I pretended not to notice his manner, how quiet it had become, how reluctant to speak about these things. She's trying to get information out of him. I mean, she can't help it. She's curious. And this Rebecca is just a permanent fixture in her life. And he said something about her boat at the top of page 132. A strange sort of excitement was upon me. I had to go on with my questions. He did not want to talk about it. I knew that, but although I was sorry for him and shocked at my own self, I had to continue. I could not be silent. What happened to her? She said. Was that the boat she was sailing when she drowned? Yes, he said quietly. It capsized and sank. She was washed overboard. What made it capsize? That would be my question. It can be very squally in the bay. So she's trying to get information at the bottom. She must have been, at the very bottom of page 132, she must have been drowned then, trying to swim to shore after the boat sank. Yes, he said. How long, can you believe the question she's asking? How long afterwards was it that they found her? About 2 months. Yikes. Of course, we know she was not in very good condition. Look at the middle of this page. Maxine went up to Edgecombe to identify her. Suddenly, I did not want to ask him anymore. I felt sick at myself, sick and disgusted. I was like a curious sightseer standing on the fringe of a crowd after someone had been knocked down. I felt like a poor person in a tenement building. Look at these analogies. Du Maurier is really good at these comparisons. When someone has died, asking if I might see the body. I hated myself. My questions had been degrading, shameful. Frank Carley must despise me. It's like a gaper's block on the freeway. People just can't help themselves. Let's see. Page 134. She says, Frank, you think I'm morbid and curious in a rather beastly way. It's not that, I promise you. It's only that sometimes I feel myself at such a disadvantage. It's all very strange to me, living here at Manderley. End of the paragraph. You see, I know that all the time, whenever I meet anyone new, they are all thinking the same thing. How different she is to Rebecca. Yeah, she is. But she assumes it's negative. We don't know. At the top of 135, and I realize every day the things I lack, confidence, grace, beauty, intelligence, wit, oh, all the qualities that mean most in a woman, she possessed. And she assumes she does not. Um, he says, you have qualities that are just as important. Good Frank. Um, Far more so, in fact. It's perhaps cheeky of me to say so. I don't know you very well. I'm a bachelor. I don't know very much about women. I lead a quiet sort of life down here at Manderley, as you know. But I should say that kindliness and sincerity, and if I may so, modesty, are worth far more to a man, to a husband, than all the wit and beauty in the world. Well, boy, she really needed to hear that. We go on to the next page. At the end of the bigger paragraph towards the top, none of us want to bring back the past. Maxime least of all. And it's up to you, you know, to lead us away from it, not to take us back there again. He was right, of course. I had been selfish and hypersensitive, a martyr to my own inferiority complex. Oh, I love that line. A martyr to my own inferiority um, um, complex. Bottom of this page, I'm on 136. We were out of the dark, wooded drive and into the light again. So they had gone down this question and answer period. He tells her what her role is, and the weather reflects that. So in this case, it's kind of the landscape. We were out of the dark, wooded drive and into the light again. The rhododendrons were upon us. Theirs was a brief beauty, not lasting very long. Top of page 137. We came round the sweep of the drive, and Manderley was before us, serene and peaceful in the hollow of the lawns, surprising me as it always did with its perfect symmetry and grace and its great simplicity. Frank waited a moment. I could not see his face. She says, tell me, was she really beautiful? And he pauses. Yes, yes, I suppose she was the most beautiful creature I ever saw in my life. I just wish I could see her. Oh, next chapter. This is 12. Mrs. Danvers appoints a maid for the eye speaker, and it's this little creature, Clarice, the daughter of somebody on the estate, a nice, quiet, well-mannered girl who, thank heaven, had never been in service before and had no alarming standards. Comparing her to Mrs. Danvers. Mrs. Danvers, over on page 139, Mrs. Danvers, now that I knew the reason for Mrs. Danvers' dislike and resentment, it made things a little easier. She hates the second Mrs. De Winter because she was devoted to the first one. I knew it was not just me personally she hated, but what I represented. But unfortunately for our eye speaker, she's just completely immersed in Rebecca's world. Down at the bottom of 139, Frank had told me to forget the past, and I wanted to forget it, but Frank did not have to sit in the morning room as I did every day and touch the pen she had held between her fingers. He did not have to rest his hands on the blotter and stare in front of him at her writing on the pigeonhole. Oh, get rid of the desk, for gosh sakes. He did not have to look at the candlesticks on the mantelpiece, the clock, the vase in which the flowers stood, the pictures in the walls, on the walls. And remember, every day that they belonged to her. She had chosen them. They were not mine at all. Frank did not have to sit at her place in the dining room, hold the knife and fork that she had held, drink from her glass. He did not throw a coat over his shoulders, which had been hers, nor find a handkerchief in the pocket. He did not notice every day, as I did, the blind gaze of the old dog in the basket in the library, who lifted its head when it heard my footsteps, the footstep of a woman, and sniffing the air, dropped its head again because I was not the one it sought. So we're even getting the perspective from the eyes, the nose maybe, of the older dog. Little things, meaningless and stupid in themselves, but they were there for me to see, for me to hear, for me to feel. That's really sad. Um, she says, I was like a guest. And then down at the bottom, I'm not the first to do it. And I suppose it's kind of like when you move into a new house. Most of you know that I bought this house about 3 years ago, and when you walk into a new house, the house was open when I found it, and somebody else's furniture was here, and I found recently pictures of the house with somebody else's furniture in it that I was right before I was thinking about buying the house. It was weird. It was weird to think that somebody else lived here. So she receives these books from Beatrice. They're a wedding present. They're books about art, and there's 6 big fat ones. And at the top of page 142 is the little China Cupid incident. So I found an envelope. She puts the books up high on the shelf, and one of them falls off and smashes the China Cupid. And interesting. Oh, I think I have a note about that. Yeah, I do. So in this little interaction, the Cupid versus the books, I thought that was funny. Um, the books are a wedding present from Beatrice, and it smashes Rebecca's Cupid. A wedding present. Of course, you know what a Cupid is. It's I think this piece is about that big, and a Cupid is the representative of love. And Mrs. DeWitt, the eye speaker's books, smash the Cupid. And poor eye speaker, she puts all the pieces, the bits, into an envelope and puts it in the drawer and doesn't know what to do. Um, there's an interesting note. I cannot remember where I got this idea, but these are copies of masterpieces. So the book is not masterpieces, it's pictures of masterpieces, which is reminiscent of the postcard that we see periodically. It's the postcard was a picture of Manderley. These are pictures of arts. But does this say something about maybe the facade that has been put up around this character of Rebecca? Maybe. Here is, right in the middle of page 142, is this statement by Maxine that writing letters is a waste of time. Hold that in your head, because our poor eye speaker tries to write letters and doesn't have anybody to write it to. And Rebecca must have written a jillion letters inviting people to this and inviting people to that. Down at the bottom of page 142, in comes Boom. Mrs. Danvers. It's about Robert, sir. There has been a slight unpleasantness between him and Mrs. Danvers. That's Frith saying that to Maxine. Oh, Lord, said Maxine, making a face at me. I bent down to fondle Jasper, my unfailing habit in moments of embarrassment. I love that. I love that. It's so true. There's Daphne. Can you see her? There she is. And so Mrs. Danvers comes in and says that she has accused Robert, or she thinks Robert smashed or stole the Cupid. Actually, they don't even know it's smashed yet. Oh, Lord, that was one of our treasures, isn't it? Um, it will have to be found. Get hold of Mrs. Danvers at once. And then she says, I broke it. You broke it? Why the devil didn't you say so when Frith was here? I don't know. I didn't like to. I was afraid he would think me a fool. Don't be a little idiot, he says. Anyone would think you were afraid of them. I am afraid of them. At least not afraid, but I think the word she's looking for is intimidated. I'm sorry, she says on the next page, 144. She looked at me with her white skull's face and her dark eyes. She has to apologize to the housekeeper. Down at the bottom of 144, perhaps Mrs. De Winter was not aware of the value of that ornament, said Mrs. Danvers, turning her eyes upon me. Oh, she's really intimidating. Over on page 145, what the devil has she got to be furious about? It's not her bit of china. No, but she takes such pride in it all. It's so awful to think nothing in there has ever been broken before. It had to be me, of course. Better you than the luckless Robert, which is true, because Robert probably would have gotten the devil beaten out of him if he had in fact stolen it. Damn Mrs. Danvers, Maxime says at the bottom of 144. She's not God Almighty, is she? I can't understand you. What do you mean by saying you are afraid of her? I did not mean afraid exactly. I don't see much of her. It's not that. I can't really explain. Intimidated, I'm telling you, that's the word she's seeking. The top of 146. I am like a between maid, I said slowly. I know I am, in lots of ways. That's why I have so much in common with Clarice. At the end of the paragraph, Clarice says, it's not like being with a lady, Mum. It's like being with one of ourselves. So even Clarice sees the difference in class. She says, I can't help being shy. I've not been brought up to all this at the top of 147. No, she hasn't. In some ways, it's way easier nowadays. We don't have to get into a car and drive over to somebody's house and call on people. You just ring up on the phone. She says in the middle of 147, I suppose that's why you married me. I said, you knew I was dull and quiet and inexperienced so that there would never be any gossip about me. Watch his facial expression. You should always pay attention to the facial expressions. He threw down his paper. What do you mean? His face was dark and queer, and his voice was rough. Not his voice at all. What do you mean about what do you know about any gossip down here? I said, I don't. Scared by the way he looked at me. I only said it because of something to say. Don't look at me like that, Maxime. What have I done? What's the matter? The darkness has come onto his face. Next page. He stared at me moodily. It's not a good word, moodily. I might have to remember that one. She says, I felt very cold, rather sick. How do you mean? I said. I'm not much of a companion to you, am I? It's true. There are too many years between us. You ought to have waited and then married a boy of your own age, not someone like myself with half his life behind him. That concept of all the memories that he has, she doesn't know about. And when he goes to that place of memory, The darkness comes over his face. She says, I love you. You are my father, my brother, and my son. All those things. I wrote in the margin, it's a little odd, isn't it? Just a little. Poor thing. But he doesn't return the sentiment. Are you happy here? He said, looking away from me out of the window. I wonder sometimes. You've got thinner, lost your color. That idea that the further they get away from Italy, the thinner, more drab they become. And he patted my cheek in his terribly absent way, and bent down and kissed the top of my head. He's so distant. That's an element of him that we will continue to watch. The distance. She keeps trying to enlist some kind of emotion from him. It's just not there. Mid 149. You know our marriage is a success, a wonderful success. If you say so, then it's all right. There seems to be a very clear desire to not fail in this marriage. No, but you think it too, don't you, darling? It's not just me. We are happy, aren't we? Terribly happy? Please? And she says down at the bottom, why don't you answer me? In that preceding paragraph, she's got some thoughts. I sat down in the window seat and let go of his hands. I heard myself speaking in a hard, cool voice. If you don't think we are happy, it would be much better if you would admit it. I don't want you to pretend anything. I'd much rather go away, not live with you anymore. It was not really happening, of course. It was in the girl in the play, not me to Maxine. That she's thinking that. And he doesn't answer. How can I answer you? He says. I don't know the answer myself. If you say we are happy, let's leave it at that. And it's something I know nothing about. I take your word for it. We are happy. All right then? Agreed? Next paragraph on page 150. You say all this because you are disappointed in me, I said. I'm gauche and awkward. I dress badly. I'm shy with people. I warned you in Monte Carlo how it would be. You think I'm not right for Manderley. That comparison is still there, and she still maintains that it's a negative comparison. She says, we've argued in a circle. This all began because I broke the Cupid in the morning room. Oh, damn the infernal Cupid, he says. And then down at the bottom of page 150, no, I don't think it was. As a matter of fact, I believe it was a wedding present. Rebecca knew a lot about China. So put a star in that, because the I Speaker's wedding present smashes Rebecca's wedding present, the symbol of love. By this time, I was just about cheering. At the end of this paragraph, he was staring straight in front of him. He was thinking about Rebecca. I said to myself, she's speculating. He was thinking how strange it was that a wedding present to me should have been the cause of destroying a wedding present to Rebecca. So noted. Oops, I'm going to try not to. Oh, here's a bit about the Cupid. Oh, and I read that. At the end of this chapter, he sat down in the chair again and folded the paper. I looked out the window. Presently, Jasper came to me and climbed in my lap. So here's this little creature who's providing her some comfort. The argument has gone away, and she gets comfort from the dog, but not from Maxine. At the top of page 152, the beginning of chapter 13. I'm going to get to chapter 14. Yeah. Chapter 14 is the creepiest chapter in the entire book. She creates a story. There would be an accident, of course, and later on in the afternoon, she's worried because Maxine has gone off to London. should find Frith white and frightened, waiting for me with a message. The doctor would have rung up from some cottage hospital. You must be very brave, he would say. I am afraid you must be prepared for a great shock. This is her little scenario. It was so real to me that I could scarcely eat my lunch. And then he rings up. Um, she couldn't eat because she was so worried, and she believes her story. And yet, at the top of page 153, well, at the bottom of 53, Maxime rings up. He doesn't ask to talk to her. There's always that distance. But she's so relieved that she says it was like coming ashore after a channel crossing. Nice metaphor. And then she eats, she can't find anything else, so she eats Bath Oliver's. Okay, I had to look that up. It's a hard biscuit, and it was invented by somebody named Oliver who lived in Bath. So they're just little hard cookies. I bet they're something like digestives. I don't know if you've ever eaten digestives. They're delicious wheat cookies, or I don't know what they are. They're just delicious. Next paragraph. I felt very well and curiously happy, with a sense of freedom. She plays. She thinks of herself. One put on an old skirt and a pair of sand shoes and played hare and hounds on the common with the children who lived next door. She's remembering these various games from her childhood. Hare and hounds sounds a lot like a game that I used to play. It's called Red Rover. Do you remember that? Red Rover. Have somebody come over, and then you would run up on the. It's the same story, same game. It's rather interesting that Maxime is in London. She was very afraid that he was going to crash, but yet in the middle of the page she feels pretty free of him. I was rather shocked at myself. I could not understand it at all. I had not wanted him to go, and now this lightness of heart, this spring in my step, this childish feeling that I wanted to run across the lawn and roll back down the bank. I wiped the biscuit crumbs from my mouth and called to Jasper. Perhaps I was just feeling like this because it was a lovely day. She's feeling free. He's gone, and he's safe. She doesn't want anything to happen to him, but she's enjoying this. Next paragraph. We went through the happy valley to the little cove. The azaleas were finished now. The petals lay brown and crinkled on the moss. They're dead. White azaleas. Like Rebecca's dead. At the bottom of this page, I wondered why it was that places are so much lovelier when one is alone. She sees bluebells, which are a symbol of, I looked this up in my book here, constancy, gratitude, and everlasting love. If Maxine had been there, I should not be lying as I was now, chewing a piece of grass, my eyes shut. I should have been watching him, watching his eyes, his expression, wondering if he liked it, if he was bored, wondering what he was thinking. Now I could relax. Isn't that interesting? So they go to the other beach, at the top of page 155. The buoy was just opposite, about 30 feet away. There was something written on it. The air of mystery. I craned my neck sideways to read the letter. Je reviens. What a funny name. Not like a boat. Perhaps it had been a French boat, though, a fishing boat. Fishing boats sometimes have names like Happy Return, I'm here, those sorts of names. Je reviens, I came back. Yes, I supposed it was quite a good name for a boat, only it had not been right for that particular boat, which would never come back again, because, as we know, it overturned and sank. There's something eerie about this whole place. She tells herself there was nothing to be frightened of, nothing at all. It's kind of like at the beginning of Telltale Heart. I am not mad. She's saying here, there's nothing to be scared of. Nothing at all. So, she notices that the cottage, it was not entirely closed. I was certain I had closed it the last time. Jasper began growling, sniffing under the door. Oh, the mystery is mounting. Jasper growled again. He barked furiously. Something was there, inside the corner. Not a rat. He would have gone for a rat. It's Ben. Poor Ben. He ran into the cottage. He watched me with his sly idiot's eyes, which is kind of an oxymoron. But again, this is from the 1930s when we didn't have the need to be more diplomatic about our language choices. At the top of page 157, I walked quickly out into the sunshine, from the dark of the cottage into the light. "I done nothing," he said. "I never told no one. I don't want to be put in the asylum." What? Seems to me that somebody must have threatened him. He grinned again, rubbing his ears, his fright forgotten. "You've got angel eyes. Remember, he is a truth speaker. You are not like the other one." "Who do you mean? What other one?" "Tall and dark she was. She gave you the feeling of a snake." "I seen her here with me own eyes. But by night she'd come. I seen her." He paused, watching me intently. I did not say anything. "I looked in on her once, and she turned on me, she did. 'You don't know me, do you?' she said. 'You've never seen me here. You won't again. If I catch you looking at me through the window here, I'll put you in the asylum.'" Wow. So my point is that, as with other characters like this in novels, the treatment of a disabled character by another character reflects a great deal about the character. And in this case, Rebecca is mean to him. The title of my book was Yardsticks, and that's because the disabled characters are measurements of other people's goodness or badness. And Rebecca isn't coming out very well here. "I won't say anything, ma'am. Oh, you wouldn't like that, would you? They're cruel to people in the asylum," she said. "I won't say nothing," I said, and I cried, and I touched me cap like this. He pulled at his sou'wester. "She's gone now, ain't she?" he said anxiously. The top of page 158. I turned and walked away, up the beach, to the path, dragging Jasper by his belt. Poor wretch. He was potty, of course, meaning Dottie or Gaga, like they said of Grandma. He did not know what he was talking about. It was hardly likely that anyone had threatened him with the asylum. Maxine had said he was quite harmless, and so had Frank. A little bit longer, and the memory of it lingered like an ugly picture in the mind of a child. A few lines later, it was absurd to notice anything said by an idiot, except that they're truth speakers. At the end of this paragraph on 158, it was as though someone waited down there in the little garden where the nettles grew, someone who watched and listened. Foreboding, right? At the bottom of this page, notice the language. There is no sense or beauty in this undergrowth. The tangle of shrubs there should be cut down to bring light to the path. It was dark, much too dark. That naked eucalyptus tree, stifled by brambles, looked like a white, bleached limb of a skeleton. And there was a black, earthy stream running beneath it, choked with the muddied rains of years, trickling silently to the beach. The birds did not sing here as they did in the valley. It was quiet in a different way. At the top of the next page, there is a contrast then between the two paths. The one leading to the Happy Valley, Happy Valley is over here, and the cottage is over here. One is dark and one is light. In the middle of the next page, at the top of 159, as I wandered across the lawn to the terrace, my eye was caught by a gleam of sunshine on something metal showing through the green of the rhododendron leaves at the turn in the drive. "There's a car in there. Yikes." And she looks up in the west wing. Somebody stood by the window. A man. Very, very creepy. So I notice that I'm a little over my time, but if I don't get further along each class, we're going to get behind. So She's looking up there. There's a man up there, and then she sees the arm of Mrs. Danvers. And at the top of page 160, at the end of that incomplete paragraph, odd that it should occur on the only day Maxime was from home. It is odd, as a matter of fact. The next paragraph goes on. We've got the faithful Jasper, the chair by the desk who had been moved. It looked as though Mrs. Danvers entertained her visitors in the morning room when Maxine and I were out. But notice, too, that Jasper doesn't bark at this man. Jasper was barking at Ben just a couple of pages ago. So there's a contrast here. Obviously, Jasper knows the man. This is Fable. Fable says, "Hello, you little tyke," I heard the man say. Jasper began to bark excitedly, so he recognizes Fable. Go on to the next page. The top of page 162. I don't smoke, she says to him. Don't you really? He took one himself and lighted it. I never minded those things, but it seemed odd to me in somebody else's room. It was surely rather bad manners, not polite to me. Yeah, it's not polite to light up a cigarette in somebody else's house. This is Mr. Fable, madam, says Mrs. Danvers, and at the top of page 163, I saw her flash a look of warning at him. I felt very uneasy. It was all wrong, this situation. It ought not to be happening. She doesn't know what he's doing there. He spoke in a familiar, rather offensive way. I did not want to go and look at his car. I felt very awkward and embarrassed. Middle of page 163. I saw him glance over his shoulder and wink at Mrs. Danvers. Clearly, they know each other. She did not wink in return. I hardly expected she would. She looked very hard and grim. Jasper frolicked out onto the drive. He seemed delighted with the sudden appearance of this visitor, whom he appeared to know so well. Remember, Jasper barked furiously at Ben, stuck in the corner of that cottage, but he knows Ben. But in this case, he perceived Ben to be something of a threat because he was hiding in the cottage. In this case, Favo is a familiar character. We go on to the next page. Let's see. Middle of page 164. By the way, he said carelessly, it would be very sporting and grand if you did not mention this little visit of mine to Max. He doesn't exactly approve of me. Well, there's the problem. I'm afraid. I don't know why, and it might get poor old Danny into trouble. You can hardly see Mrs. Danvers being addressed as poor old Danny. 165. Oh, it doesn't matter, Alice. I'll wait till Robert comes back. I said, I suppose when Maxine was away, things automatically became slack. Next, a few lines later, it was almost too well chosen. There was something not right about it. I was certain of that. So she's perceiving that something isn't right. Things are moved. Fable, who is this guy, is a little too familiar. So at the top of page 166, let's see. Why had they closed the shutters when they saw me on the lawn? There's always questions. I was filled with vague disquiet. Frith and Robert had been away. The maids were generally in their bedrooms changing during the afternoon. Mrs. Danvers would have the run of the place. Supposing this man was a thief, and Mrs. Danvers was in his pay. She was creating a little scenario to explain. There were valuable things in the West Wing. I had a sudden, rather terrifying impulse to creep upstairs, now to the West Wing, and go into those rooms and see for myself. And that leaves us to chapter 14. I'm going to stop here because I've gone on for quite a while.